Jeff, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you guys hear me?
Good afternoon all. Thank you for coming along. Before we get into the meeting proper, I've just got a privacy notice I need to read out to you all. So strap in, it's exciting. As this is a hybrid meeting, both in person and virtual, the Wesleyan Chapel camera and microphone are live, and the meeting is being recorded to assist with keeping a record of the meeting and feedback for the consultation. We will use the information you provide to inform the Council of the Isles of Scilly budget for 26-27 and the medium-term financial plan for 26-29. The data control of the information you provide in this survey is the Council of the Isles of Scilly, Old Wesleyan Chapel, Garrison Lane, St Mary's, Isles of Scilly, TR21OJD. Data protection registration number Z5715100. Once the consultation is finished, your data will be held within the Council's secure network and premises for up to 1 year. Where you supply personal data, we will only make access to this data available to authorised members of staff who are required to process it for the purposes of the consultation process. Please note that feedback you provide may be used to present to members at full council to consider when making decisions relating to the budget. Thank you. Okay. For those who don't know me, I'm Stuart Nixon. I'm the lead member for Finance, Governance, Risk and Performance and Corporate Services. You've been invited along this evening to provide your views on our spending priorities for the coming financial year. The format of the meeting will be, I will be asking Russell Ashman, our 151 Officer and Chief Executive, a number of questions have been sent to me online, and after that we shall open the floor to any questions within the room. If you do ask a question from within the room, we'll provide you with a microphone so everything's captured. If I could ask as well, if anyone's got their phones on, if they could put them on silent. Okay. I'm just going to hand over to Russell just to give an overview before we start with the questions.
Thank you, Stuart. I think when we sent out the invite, we did send out a set of information, but I'll just quickly run through the financial position of the council and some of our principles that we're using in setting our budgets for next year. You can do. You may or may not be aware, but we are facing quite a difficult financial position going forward. The current year is overspending by a significant sum of money. Currently, if we use reserves to fund that deficit, it will reduce reserves to a level which would be below what our minimum level required to be sustainable going forward. People may ask why we're in such a financial position. I think there are a number of key drivers. Closer. Okay, no problem. So we've got a difficult financial position going forward. We've got a difficult financial position the current year. As a quick what I've said to date. Looking forward, why have we got a difficult position going forward? Well, over the last 2 or 3 years, and probably going back longer than that, 10, 12 years, we've had a general push from central government that we now have to deliver all our services on the islands more and more to the national standards. I think 10, 12 years ago, there was probably a little bit more flexibility on the way that the council was allowed to deliver services, but certainly since about 2015, slowly but surely, service by service, we've been picked up and we've had to invest in services to ensure that they meet the minimum standards. We see more and more regulators on a regular basis. I think one or 2 months last year, we had regulators every week for 4 or 5 weeks coming through and wanting to come and look at what we were doing and measure us against the national standards. We're also seeing demand pressures similar to that on the mainland in terms of adult social care. Adult social care has seen these issues for a number of years on the mainland, but we're now beginning to see them on the islands where we're getting relative, but we're getting more people requiring services, and many of those require more complex care than in the past, which costs significantly more money. We have an issue trying to employ people on the island. There's a reduced and competing labour force on the island. That's driving up cost. And obviously, the government settlement. So we've been doing a significant amount of lobbying with the government over the last 3, 4, 5 years. We keep trying to get them to understand the nature of the services we deliver on the islands, the services that are needed, the challenges. We think we get the message across, but we're told all the time that they need a funding review or a fairer funding review before they can make any changes. We had the fairer funding review last year, second half of last year. Unfortunately, when we actually got the settlement just before Christmas on the 17th of December, there was no real changes. In fact, it was probably the lowest settlement we've had in a number of years. There's no doubt that the message that we thought had been taken away hadn't reached, certainly not the people that make the decisions in London. And overall, our settlement is well below the unitary council average. We've had no funding to address remoteness and accessibility, whereas other councils have. And I don't think anyone will argue that you can't get much more remote and inaccessible than you can on the islands. But government don't think we're remote or inaccessible at all from their viewpoint. And any lack of any ideas about how our local council tax base works. They have made assumptions that we can get growth in our tax base equivalent to 200 houses in the next 18 months. So when they calculate how much council tax we raise, they seem to think that there's going to be 200 more houses by 2028 on the island paying council tax. I think what they've done is they've assumed that the uplift that we've had from second homes can be repeated and repeated and repeated year on year. So, which is obviously not deliverable. So when they've done their calculations, they seem to think that we would have a reasonable settlement. I don't think we could say it was good. If you put the proper council tax figures in, it's a very poor settlement. So on top of us being driven to increase costs on services to ensure that we meet the national standards, they haven't actually provided any additional funding to help us do that. That obviously there creates a gap. We've got a gap which is circa about £800,000 at the moment, which is a very, very significant sum for a council of this size. And legally, that's a real challenge to setting a balanced budget, because balanced budget we do have to set. We aren't allowed to set a deficit. And at the moment, the only way that we can foresee it doing that is the government have encouraged us to apply for exceptional funding support from the government, which is a short-term solution. and that will buy us a little bit more time to work with the government, hopefully get more funding and hopefully drive down some of our costs. I'm not sure we can drive out all of our costs without going back onto the issue. We'll be delivering services below national standards, and then we'll have regulators telling us that. So it's a difficult position. In terms of setting the budget next year, we're anticipating or proposing that we will go to the council tax limit of 4.99%. 2.99% of that will be for general services and 2% for adult social care. And we're still going to run with a very similar set of principles as we did last year, which is along the lines that council tax to the maximum. We will maintain the existing council tax support scheme for those that need it at the existing level, which is the maximum we can do, and is probably the best that any council in the country offer. We will continue with our principle that those who should pay do pay. So where services are delivered that should be recovered through fees and charges rather than through general council tax, that we make sure that we do that with the right level of fees and charges and the right level of charges that recover full cost and not just a proportionate cost. The principles that the budget will underwrite the work on the children's improvement plan to ensure that we address the inadequate rating by Ofsted, and will only use reserves to smooth the budget over a short period of time and not to fund ongoing expenditure, which is a very bad situation to get in. And if we did get into that position, we probably haven't got the reserves to do such for a very long period anyway. You'll know that our council tax, and I'll touch on it later in the questions, is relatively low in terms of its rate compared with a lot of councils elsewhere in the country. But there's not a lot we can do about that with the government setting the cap at 4.99%. And anyway, it's a question of whether members of the council would want to pass on any further charges to the community anyway. But that is where we are. We have a very difficult position with the budget. We have got a series of savings built into the budget next year. Most of those savings are around adult social care and trying to bring adult social care back towards its budget envelope, and in particular in around the use of agency staff and interim staff. The plan is to, and we've already started on this, is to reduce our reliance on those and pick people up on permanent council contracts. That's already starting to see some changes. We will need to be looking at the way that we do assessments, financial assessments, care assessments as well, and talking with colleagues in health, etc., about who's paying for what, because there's an awful lot of complex cases that we've got, and there's a question mark of whether there should be contribution from the health services towards them, and that those discussions need to be had fairly urgently in the new year. Most of the services are not going to reduce or cut or close services at the moment. That is a position. Obviously, with such a difficult financial position, there may be further need to revisit that at some point in the future, but it's not part of the existing proposed budget.
And what I'm now going to do is I've received 18 questions in advance of this meeting, which I now read out one by one for Russell to answer. Following that, we shall throw questions open to the room and to the online people. Okay, thank you. So the first question I have is, when will you know if the exceptional financial support will be approved? If not approved, what immediate actions will council need to take?
Okay, I'll answer these, and a lot of them I am referring to notes, because these answers will go straight into the full council report for transparency. So a little bit of reading, but straight away I'll say is we should know early next week in terms of our application for exceptional financial support. I'm speaking to the government on a daily basis at the moment. It will need ministerial sign off, and that should happen next week. If we don't get the funding, then we will be in a position where we still have to set a budget. Technically, it should be a balanced budget by the 11th of March by law in order for us to be able to set the council tax levels for next year, and that is for both the council and the police. So we would still need to be able to do that. I think in essence what would happen is that it would be a budget that would be balanced on paper but not deliverable. I think the Section 151 statement would say that, and say that the Section 151 officer probably can't support the budget. Members would then still have to vote it through. I think I'm trying to work this through as we go, because we obviously need to set the level of council tax. We would then certainly then go into a process which is referred to as a Section 114 notice, where I then say, as the statutory officer, that the council's financial plans don't add up and we need to do something very urgently about it. And that comes back to the elected members. Almost certainly that will then trigger a government intervention, and they will look at doing a review and sending a team down probably to review our financial position. It should just be commented on that the whole idea of the exceptional support is to avoid Section 114. So there's a little bit of it would be a rather strange situation if they didn't approve it, but then anything is possible at the moment.
Thank you. The next question is, what services are most at risk if additional funding does not materialise?
Yeah, if the FS funding is not forthcoming, we will need to review all services, both statutory and non-statutory, and look to see if there are any alternative delivery models. So it wouldn't be just looking at discretionary schemes, discretionary budgets. It'd be looking at the whole. We'd have to see if there's different ways of delivering even some of the statutory services. Yeah, that may lower the scope of some of those services, lower the quality, but still keep within the right side of the law. However, with the ever increasing regulatory inspection regime that we have to endure around statutory services, I think the scope for savings will be limited on statutory services. Therefore, it'll be the discretionary services there where there'll be most scope for further savings. Again, I think the first instance will be looking to see whether there's alternative ways of delivering services, whether there's a use of a voluntary process, voluntary sector, whether there's the ability to get partners more involved. But then obviously it comes down to whether we need to reduce those services. There is a relatively short list of discretionary services that are truly discretionary. Although what I would say is a lot of statutory services, it's statutory to do the service, but it's not always clear at what level those services need to be delivered. But to give you a flavour of the sort of services which are discretionary, we've got the you know, no secret on the first one because it's in the title of the thing on our website, which is the discretionary concessionary boating scheme for adults. There's other boating things like the early years are not statutory, but again, you know, we're not talking about doing anything with any of those at the moment. The question here was, what is discretionary? So the question is, these are the discretionary. We have no plans to cut these at the moment or reduce them, but these are the discretionary services. The post-16 transport and accommodation, where we have a top-up. Running an airport, although the airport does pay, with the proposals we got, will be self-funding. So actually, you know, there's not a lot of savings or any savings if we actually stop the operation. Things like public toilets, the customer hub, the swimming pool, the leisure centre, active Scilly, housing delivery, scrutiny committee, the capital development type areas. Those are discretionary, but as I said, just want to get out before people get worried. There are no plans to do anything with those. I'm just answering the question.
Thank you. The next question is, what impact will the 4.99% council tax rise have on households already struggling with cost of living pressures?
the 4.99% will equate for the council element, because the police will be putting theirs up. But for the council element, it equates to £1.59 a week. We will still be retaining our local council tax support scheme, which I've already said is at the maximum that can be offered, and is almost certainly the only council in the country offering that level of support. We'll also be retaining in our budget the council tax hardship budget. So yes, it's going up. It got up by £1.59, and we're retaining everything we have currently in place to support people that may have difficulties.
The next question is, which area of adult and children's services are most vulnerable under the proposed budget? Also, how will service quality be monitored if resources are reduced?
Right, the majority of the services in adults and children's are statutory services, and I've already explained that we will review those, but the likelihood of being able to find any savings in those areas are very, very limited, particularly as both of those services are heavily regulated. We see the regulator on the island on a regular basis. So there is no plans to actually significantly reduce the services. There is plans to try and get better value for money, particularly in adult services at the moment, and to reduce our reliance on agency staff. In terms of how we'll be monitoring, if they are reduced, well, we're not going to reduce them. But if we did, any services that have to be reduced and reduced significantly will require a full consultation with the public, impact assessments, and then the monitoring thereafter to ensure that they are both delivered and the impacts are monitored.
And then the next question is there a contingency plan if inflation or demand rises faster than projected?
Yeah, as part of the budget, we will have a line which is called a contingency budget. It will be there to provide some cover if inflation does rise faster than we anticipated. We've estimated that inflation will be 3% going forward for next year, dropping to the government target thereafter. If it does increase significantly more than that, I say we've got the contingency budget, and as long as we get the EFS funding, our exceptional funding, then we will have sufficient reserves to be able to underwrite that in the short term.
Thank you. The next question is, how will the council communicate these financial challenges transparently to residents and ensure that any conflicts of interest for councillors are raised or flagged?
Well, if we receive the exceptional financial support, then we're not looking actually at removing services in the first instance. So in terms of financial challenges, they won't go away, but we will have funding to ensure that we can set a balanced budget going forward. And I said, at the moment, there's no real significant savings in terms of service delivery and service quality. Which question? And the conflicts, yeah. I mean, obviously, the council has a process of governance in place which covers how we deal with councillors and conflicts of interest on a regular basis.
Thank you. The next question is it a possibility that if the council could not set a balanced budget and became bankrupt, Cornwall Council would take on administration of the Isles of Scilly?
I think if we can't set a balanced, robust budget, then what does happen? Well, as I said earlier, the Section 151 with our statutory obligations will need to issue what they call a Section 114 notice, which basically says that the council is not financially viable going forward. We haven't heard about the exceptional funding yet, so we need to be careful that that would prevent a Section 114. And it's interesting that the exceptional funding support process was only introduced 2 years ago, and it was introduced to ensure that councils didn't actually reach a 114 position. So the assumption at the moment is that our application will be successful, because the whole idea of the process is to prevent getting to that next level. But there's always an if or when that could happen. So it's obviously not 100%. If we did reach that level, what are the options? Well, the government would certainly start looking at options. One option obviously would be to see whether this council could be reorganised into Cornwall Council. That would be one of the options I expect that would be on the table that they could look at. I'm sure that maybe when they're sat in London, it might look quite appealing to them. But what I would say about that is there's an awful lot of work to do that, a hell of a lot of work if they ever wanted to do that. We have a special status in local government legislation. We're outside of a lot of legislation. We stand alone. We are not part of any of the groups that are normally referred to in local government. And there's basic statutory primary legislation that says there must always be a Council of the Isles of Scilly, and it cannot be run from Cornwall. So the government would have to go around. How do they change that primary legislation that goes back many, many years? It's been through central government a number of times, but it goes back over 100 years. And I think it was last refreshed 20, 30 years ago. But it's very, very clear that, you know, it's a big battle if they wanted to do that. It would cost a lot of money. And now why I say that is £800,000 is a significant sum to us as a council. It's a significant sum to yourselves, probably on a personal point of view. You know, this is a government that's got billions in its local government budget. You know, £800,000. They've probably spent that already trying to deal with me and Robert knocking on their door asking why they're not giving us the right money. So it would cost far more than £800,000 to do a government reorganisation. It also has been done elsewhere in the country. It takes 3 or 4 years to go through the process. There has to be full public consultation, changes to statutory, as I said, statutory, primary statutory legislation, and there's an assumption there that even if Cornwall even wanted to be part of it, Cornwall have got a massive budget black hole of their own. They've got massive challenges of their own. Running services over here, which are already stretched, with a further additional black hole. Question mark would be whether they'd even be willing or wanting to do it, such a thing. So I think, although it's a theoretical discussion, I think reality may be slightly different, whether it is a realistic end game that would happen. So that's the answer to that question.
Thank you. There's a couple of follow-up questions around Cornwall Council. I'll put in now. I know you've answered part of it already. What would be the implications if Cornwall Council took on responsibility for the island's administration? It would almost certainly lead to a much higher council tax bill for residents. Cornwall's Band D council tax is £500 more than the Council of the Isles of Scilly's Band D, for example. It would lead to worse services and less representation. Yeah, well, bear in mind what I've just said, but if it did happen, one of the things that happens in local government reorganisation is that you do have to equalise council tax, i.e. you can't have 2 different levels of council tax within one council's geographical area. The equalisation has to be done over a period of time. It can be done day one. It can be done as late as, I think, year 3 or 4. I can't remember the exact. Sometime since I was involved back in the Cornwall days, 2009, but it has to be done. You can work out for yourself that if Cornwall Council are charging significantly more to its 570,000 residents, it's not going to suddenly reduce that. So yes, you would equalise up to the Cornwall Council figure if it happened. I'm just saying I don't think it would actually happen. And question mark of, you know, would we have less representation? Almost certainly, from a member perspective, we have 16 members. The ratio between members and the public is significantly higher than anywhere else in the country. I would imagine at the very best, if you would have one elected member, or even be a shared elected member like it is with the MP. Okay, and one more question on Cornwall Council. If assumptions are correct regarding what could happen if Cornwall Council takes on the islands, Will the council clearly communicate this risk to the public, and what will it mean for them and the islands as a whole?
Well, as I said, the process has to go through a very long process with lots of public consultation. It would also require changes in legislation, and it does take 3 or 4 years. So during that process, I'm sure that it would be very, very clearly communicated throughout the islands of what was happening. This isn't going to be some, if it happened, it isn't going to. We're not going to be rocking up and saying to yourself that actually this has happened overnight and we didn't have a say in it. It will take a very long period of time, and I think everyone will be very aware of it.
Thank you. A question on council tax. Have or will councillors consider increasing council tax by more than 5% in order to set a balanced budget through a local referendum or through special permission from central government?
Yeah, as the question said, there are 2 ways that we can set a council tax as a council above the 5% cap. What I would say is both are not on the table at the moment due to the timing. Both would have had to have been started some time ago. The first is through a local referendum. That does cost money. Bear in mind that a 1% increase in council tax is worth approximately £20,000. To start making a significant impact on any budget gap that we've got, the increase would have to be significant. This isn't going for a 6 or 7% increase is not going to suddenly miraculously change the financial position of the council. The other option that is open to councils is through the exceptional funding process. We can request the powers to increase council tax by more than the cap. The government then build that in, if they so wish, into council tax legislation going forward, that we will be outside of the normal level of cap. They've done that already with, I think, 8 or 9 authorities. But again, most of those, it's 7 or 8% over 2 or 3 years, because their tax base and their collection of council tax is far more significant. And over 3 or 4 years, they can generate an awful lot more revenues and help deliver a solution to their problems. Just bear in mind that it's worth noting that our Band D local council tax will be, if the budget goes forward on the basis it's set at the proposed at the moment, it'd be £1,744. Cornwall's is £2,086. But also in Cornwall, there are town and parish councils, and the average precept in town and parish councils is about £500 to £600. So a Band D in Cornwall is usually about 2,600 compared with £1,700 here. So we're significantly lower. So in theory, there is scope to increase it, but I don't think that the elected members have that in mind at the moment.
Thank you. The next question is, have the council considered levying a tourist tax? Is such a tax possible?
It has been discussed, but it's not legally possible to be delivered anyway. Currently, there's no legislation in England that allows such a tourist tax to be put in place. There is in Scotland and Wales, but not in England. However, there is proposed legislation that is being looked at by the existing government, which would allow a tourist tax in England to be raised, but only in the areas that are covered by what they call a strategic mayoral authority. We are not going to be part of a strategic mayoral authority. Therefore, there is not, at the moment, the way the legislation is drafted, it is not possible for the islands.
Thank you. So, okay, we'll do. I'll move it a bit forward. Apologies for that. Is that better? Thank you. Okay. The next question is, how many vacancies are currently filled by agency staff and consultants, and how much is that costing the council in excess of what it would normally cost to employ staff in those vacancies directly?
Biggest area we've got a challenge in at the moment, and it's clearly set out in both our budget papers and today's quarterly Q3 report to full council, is in adult social care, where back in January there was a point where we had 10 agency staff in the care home. They cost approximately £40,000 each, more expensive than if we employ them ourselves. So you can work out that's £400,000, including their accommodation, etc. We are now at least starting to see a reduction. I think it's gone down from 10 to 5 in the last 6 weeks. Some of that is converting some to permanent contracts who want a permanent life on Scilly, and others are changes in rotas and working with health to try and see if there's a better way of using resources between us. There is also some cost in interim staff in both adults and children's at the moment. In the adult area, it's probably costing about 120,000 more. We're 3/4 of the way through recruitment processes there, which will eradicate that going forward. We've used interims in the short term. That is now hopefully will be. He says hopefully because we haven't finished the recruitment process, and these things always have a habit. If you say it's done and dusted, biting you. But it should be that we will be moving away from interim staff, and similarly in children's services, we've appointed directors, heads of service, and some social work staff now. There are still some more to do, but we are fast moving through that process. So we will be making those savings there. In terms of consultants, our use of consultants is relatively light as true consultants. The one or two consultants we've got are employed on very specific pieces of work. They are funded from specific earmarked grants from the government, and they're usually employed because they have a skill set that doesn't exist within our own workforce. Again, they will be dropped off as soon as the work is done and the funding from those grants stops. So it is a big part of our budget pressure is the use of interim and agency staff. We are trying with everything we got at the moment to reduce that.
Thank you. The next question is, what council services are non-statutory? What is their total cost to the council? And what would be the impact to the community if they were cut?
I've already read out what those services are. Each of them have their own budget. I'm not going to verbatim these out. It's not a massive significant sum of money, but it is, it is still chunky. But in terms of what the impact will be to community, bear in mind, there is no proposals to reduce those services currently. I just need to put that out there because people will go away thinking we're about to start closing services. There isn't. We're not doing that. And as I said earlier, any changes to those service delivery areas would be covered with impact assessments, public consultation, etc. So that impact assessment would identify the level of the cut and what impact that would have on the service. So I can't do that without doing an impact assessment, and we wouldn't do that until we got to the place where members had decided. And as I say, that is not part of our proposed plans for next year, so we haven't started impact assessment. I can't tell you off the top of my head. I'd have to go away and look at it. They're each individual ones have a budget. I seem to think it adds up to about £500,000 when you add them all together, because some of them are income earning, so they're not, the net budget isn't as big as you would think the gross budget is. But yeah, it isn't several £1,000,000. It's about £500,000 when you add them all up.
Thank you. The next question is, how is the council lobbying for more funding from central government? What are the key arguments given to government?
Question was that? 14. We've had constant dialogue, South and Robert, over the last many years actually, but over the last 2 years we picked that up with a significant number of visits from officials and ministers onto the islands. We've shown them firsthand what our challenges are. We've had them engage in public meetings, particularly on the off islands, so they can get a real feel of, as far away from London as you can get and as remote as you can get. Come and speak to some of the off island people, particularly on the likes of St Agnes. They've done that on numerous times. And then whenever they go away, there's a sort of strong feeling that they understand it, but they keep getting pushed back to, well, we'll need a funding review, a fairer funding review before we can make the changes. The key areas that we've pushed them on are, in particular, our unique characteristics are how remote and inaccessible we are. We haven't got a borough next door. If you're in London and you've got a bit of a struggle with your own labour force or whatever, you've got umpteen boroughs up against you. There's always assistance and help you can get. We haven't got that. It's 32 miles away. It costs a very lot of money, as we all know, to access services on the stuff on the mainland. Equity, because we don't have the same equity in terms of access to services. Our cost of transport is unique and expensive. We're the only place in the country that does not have subsidised public transport of some kind or the other. And if you on the mainland, roads are subsidised and paid for more than just what you pay for your car tax. There is other government funding from other tax sources that go into roads, so it's subsidised. Train services are subsidised, bus services are subsidised, heavily subsidised. We have no subsidy in transport at all, either on island, between the islands, or between the islands and the mainland. That's always been one of our big pushes with the government. That's quite inequitable with the rest of the country. We have limited labour markets, particularly because of the public transport issues. When I've spoken to people in the past, we did some work with islands in Scotland. We talk about how do they deal with managing resources between islands. They have very frequent transport, and when I ask how do they afford it, they say, well, first of all transport is 75% subsidised, and local authority staff and key service staff move free of charge on transport in Scotland. So, how equitable is that? Our unit costs, because of our remoteness, are many times the mainland councils. A lot of that is we don't have volume. All our cost is in having the service. Most of our services could probably cope with a population probably 10 times the size it is without actually seeing the need to increase in cost. We have no marketplace. We can't be a commissioning council. There is no marketplace for many of the services on the islands. In fact, we're in many instances a provider of last resort. How does the government factor that in? They don't. But these are the points we're lobbying them on. We try and point out that we've got 5 islands, not just one. Sometimes they mention us in the same breath as Isle of Wight. Well, first of all, it's one island. Secondly, the population is 10 times the size almost, or certainly 5, 20, 100 times the size. Sorry, I got the numbers wrong. So it's not really a very good comparison. But we have done work with the Isle of Wight in partnership, trying to the government to understand islands and the particular challenges. Again, the outcome is not great. And we have done work through what we called the Islands Forum, which was in the previous government. And actually, before the change of government, and this government have now disbanded it, we were beginning to get a little bit of interest, particularly by Michael Gove, who was Secretary of State at that time, and he was beginning to show quite an interest in Scilly and our challenges. Unfortunately, an election paid to that actually becoming more positive. But those are the type of issues that we have been lobbying on over the last 2 or 3 years.
Thank you. The next question is, have we considered why central government should care about Scilly and what our importance is in the national picture?
This is quite a good question. Yes, we have. Current feedback from the government pretty much is we don't seem to be very important to them in their national picture at all. The government are no doubt they are targeting their funding and their efforts at urban areas, particularly those that have a high level of deprivation. They've recently recalculated the index of deprivation. I can't remember the exact number of councils that were in it now, but we were at the bottom, hanging off the bottom by a long, long way. That's not because, i.e., we have hardly any measures of deprivation that they as deprivation. And deprivation is key to how they want to allocate funds in the future. So we're at the wrong end of the league table, unfortunately, in terms of that model.
Thank you. The next question is a statement from the questioner of the previous 5 or 6 questions. It says, I worry if we do not answer those questions, we will remain underfunded and left to fail as we are not seen as significant enough. Why should the government subsidise a community hardly the size of a village on the mainland? Whitehall might ask, I, of course, want Scilly to continue as a place to live with its unique council to navigate its own unique challenges, which can be important nationally as well as locally. But we need to make that case to central government and the community.
And we will continue to do so, I am sure.
And then the next question is from Healthwatch. It says, I have learnt from Healthwatch England that it is the intention of the Council of the Isles of Scilly to reduce the annual funding awarded to Healthwatch Isles of Scilly by 75% for the coming financial year. This would cause Healthwatch Isles of Scilly to be forced to cease operations as from 31st March 2026. This in turn would leave the Council in breach of its statutory duty to provide such a service. At the same time, the Council proposes to award pay increase of 16% to its CEO, 15% to the Senior Manager Place Economy Environment, 21% to Head Adult Social Care, and 97% to the Chief Fire Officer. How can this be justified?
Right, cover it, I'll chunk it up. First of all, the council receives £11,000 from the government to fund the Health Watch on the islands. It is proposing it will continue to use that £11,000 to fund those statutory services. That is less than we currently do because we have in the past used other council services, other council funding, which is earmarked for other services to top up the Health Watch budget. Anticipate that the proposal is we will not continue doing that. And it's a key part of our application to central government for exceptional funding. In that, you know, if the government decide and they've set out that they think our funding of £11,000 is what we should be spending on Health Watch, that is what we need to be spending. If we decide to make a local decision to spend more, and then we ask government to bail it out, I won't answer the question, but I think you can work out the answer is no. So we will not be getting funding from the government to fund any uplift over and above £11,000. Bear in mind, this is a service that £11,000 is probably a challenge. I have grants from some services from the government of less than £1,000 where they're expecting us to hit statutory targets. We had £300 recently to address the new Homelessness Act. I'm not sure what they expect us to do with £300. You know, it costs more than £300 to administer the money coming into the authority, copying all the documents that they want us, and then signing it, sending it back, and then getting external auditors to audit that. And that's not the only one. I can list 10 or 20. So having grants that are probably challenging to deliver the services that they are issued for is across the board and not just in Health Watch. In terms of the figures quoted, they're incorrect in terms of the actual pay going to the individuals. Like everyone else in the council, last year's pay award was 3.2%, which was the national negotiated pay award. I think the figures are probably coming from the statement of accounts, and they measure the roles, not the individual people, and it accounts for associated costs. It accounts for the fact that if we've replaced somebody, we may have had an overlap for 2 months, so it looks like we've paid more, but we've had overlap. In some instances, the hours have been increased, and the one I will touch on, the one that relates to the South. I'm not going to mention the others because of their individual people, but probably the reason is that the 23-24 was a different chief executive. I'm doing the chief executive and the statutory section 151 chief finance officer, which saves the council on average about £40,000 every year by combining the two roles. So that might look like I've had a pay rise. It isn't. I'm doing two roles, and that was set out from the day I started here. So it's not been a pay award in the last 2 years.
Just ask. When you get all
Okay, sorry. Just so
Oh,
the
sorry,
people
sorry.
online.
Yeah, just a point on the pay. I mean, I'm not questioning you personally, but a member of the council employment that comes over to work on the islands, out of that structure,
Yeah.
is your accommodation and your transport costs and everything included?
Yes.
Or that's included in your pay?
Yeah.
Or you pay
No,
that yourself personally?
No, it's included in the package.
So all your accommodation and your flights and your on costs here?
Well, flights and travel. That's only.
Flights and accommodation?
No other costs.
Accommodation?
No, accommodation, sorry, but not any other cost.
So that's funded extra to what you?
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's the same for all what we deem, and it went through council last year, what we call hybrid workers.
How much did they cost us? Health Watch a year?
Health Watch, well, we get 11,000 grant. This year we had an agreement that we pay them £44,000. We're proposing in the budget that we pull back to the level that the government are funding us.
So just out of interest, do we know how many second home owners we have, holiday lets we have over here? And I thought they were bringing in something where for people with second home and holiday lets, they were actually doubling their council tax. So I presume that must be a significant amount for the council because there are a vast amount of holiday homes and second homes.
Yeah, we introduced that from the 1st of April 2025. It's built into our base budget. A significant element of that was what was used to uplift our children's services budget last year to address the inadequate rating from Ofsted. The number of houses, off the top of my head, it has reduced. I think when we started last year, I think Band D equivalents, top of my head, so don't quote me on it, was about 127, and I think we're down to 104, 105 actual now. So there have been some reductions in the number of second homes, but it is a significant sum. It's already built into our base budget going forward, but it has reduced, and is one of the reasons why we got a deficit on the collection fund. Is there has been a reduction during the year in the number that we anticipated who would be paying, because they have found there's been a way that they have reduced the need to pay it.
I heard that there was a loophole, as in if it was a second home they had to pay, but if it was a holiday let they didn't. Is that correct?
There are a whole range of different criteria on it. It would, if it's a second home, definitely they pay for it, but defining what a second home is, where is the second home? If someone has two houses, if you've got someone, they have to define which is their second home, number one.
Is there any way of tightening those loopholes up? So
we will be looking at those going forward and how it's dealt with. There's no doubt that people have engineered ways out of it. I'll be polite with them, definitely. Moving across to business rates in some instances, or they do have to meet a set of quite high criteria, but they seem to be able to do it. Now, that wouldn't be the end of the world in normal circumstances, because obviously business rates forms part of our income anyway. But as part of the spending review this year, the government have reset any growth in business rates and taken it out. So anybody who's moved from council tax to business rates, we've lost the business rates element because they've reset us back to a base figure, which excludes most of our growth, or it's not growth, because in growth in the mainland is new businesses. Our only growth in business rates is people moving between the two really, because we haven't got a new factory being built or anything like that.
Sorry, can I sort of come back on that again as well, from the viewpoint that if you've got property that's empty, that's owned by the council, for example, and being used by visiting members of staff or agency, etc., are they paying rates for that property, or is the council swallowing that amount?
All the arrangements for the various properties we got are on a case-by-case basis. So there are people living here permanently who pay our rent and pay their bills. There's agency staff that are here who have everything paid for them.
But there is quite a lot of property not being lived in full time that is
and
owned by the council.
One of the processes we're going through at the moment is to try and tighten up on that and make better use of it and make the properties available to be used more flexibly. Obviously, that requires a little bit of extra cost as well, but we think there'll be a saving there in the long run. When I say extra cost, obviously, we're going to have to treat it a little bit like a self-catering accommodation. You'll have to have cleans between visits and things like that, which we don't have at the moment, but we still think overall it'll be a cost reduction. So that's already factoring into our plans to get better use of the premises we have, and obviously reduce them where we can. The proposals for the Park House, when we transition to the new care home up by the hospital, is to convert that into key worker accommodation. Some of it will be permanent apartments, but also some of it will be drop down space, more like a hotel or a bed and breakfast. So that will also ensure that we can reduce our requirements for other properties elsewhere between us and other public services, so that it's used more effectively.
But the frustration has been that agency have found being allocated accommodation, which had you been able to offer a local person a job with accommodation, you may not have had that reliance on agency. And that is really continuing. We're not seeing a real dramatic change in that. The way of making that jigsaw work rather than this crisis management that we've seen, if we can't somehow change that structure plan.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, and it is on our agenda at the moment about how do we make the roles, particularly those ones in the care home and particularly some of the lower paid jobs, how can we make them more attractive in terms of the overall package? And that is what we're working on at the moment, which will include access to accommodation. Hopefully, as we free up the accommodation by reducing our needs on agency staff, that will help. Although there is a slight, I know, and I don't know them, obviously I'm not going to go through them property by property, but on the other side of the coin, just to say that although some may be unoccupied, there's others where we have people sharing a property. We have 2, maybe 3 people sharing a 3-bedroom property, which obviously is a permanent residence that can't work. So there is a little bit of balance there.
Have you got more questions to go through?
I've just got one more on the list.
Do that and then
do that one, and then I'll throw open to the room. Thank you. Okay, so the last question that came through on email to me was, is access funding being considered in the budget, and will the council ensure that off-island children and families will have equitable access to services, clubs and childcare? Yeah,
I'm answering this on the assumption that just to be complete and accurate, that the reference to access funding is relating to the off-island boating for children and families, and because obviously the word access funding sort of a hangover from a grant that I think we received about 14 years ago. But yes, if it is referring to the boating costs of families on the off-islands to access clubs, etc., there are no proposals in the current budget that we're proposing to change those arrangements. However, I will say that obviously we will work with the various people involved to ensure that we get value for money, as we will be doing for all services. So no plans to remove it, no plans to cut it. but we will hopefully work with people to make it more efficient and better value for money.
Yeah, thank you. I'll throw open to the room. Following questions from the room, I know that Councillor Williams has a statement he'd like to read as well. And then after that, we'll go over to anyone online.
You can ask questions.
Oh, right, okay. Sorry, it's very difficult to hear. My question actually was relating to boating, and when you were talking about the discretionary services, Learn Scilly. Now, when I see Learn Scilly come up, there's probably about one course that I might be interested in. And I wonder what the take up of that is, you know, learn to crochet, let's learn to speak Spanish, let's learn other random things, jewelry making. It would be interesting to know what the take up of that is. And also everything seems to be funded. And you know, I always think when you live on St Mary's, when you live on the Isles of Scilly, you know that you're not going to have access to the services that you get on the mainland. Equally, if you live on an off island, you have to take a hit knowing you're choosing to live on the off islands. Therefore, you know that you're not going to get access to the services that people on St Mary's do. You are another step removed from the mainland. I would be interested to know what the cost of all this off-island boating is, because certainly as being based on St Mary's, we get nothing the other way. If we want to go and do anything on the off-islands, we all have to pay for it. But and then, you know, is there a limit? Do the family just come down with one parent and one child, or do they bring the whole family down? It seems, if it's a discretionary thing, perhaps that could be trimmed down a little bit and, you know, not have clubs every single night of the week, not have boats every willy-nilly. There's one boat, if you can't get it, well, tough. You've got to make an effort to get it. But the Learn Scilly thing, is that necessary to have that?
Covering the Learn Scilly first, slightly easier question. Particularly if I ever want to visit the off islands again. The Learn Scilly is funded through a specific, it's called adult education. The funding comes through various grant scenarios and is fully funded through that. It doesn't come out of what we call general fund council tax. It's one of those areas which it would be nice if we had a bit more flexibility, because maybe it would help with our overall funding, but it doesn't at the moment. It is ring-fenced funding. In terms of the early years boating and some of the other boating costs, I'm not going to quote the figures off the top of my head because I haven't got them written down, but you know, we do spend a significant sum on boating every year. Certainly from a staffing perspective, moving staff around, we're trying to reduce that, and we've reduced that quite significantly this year. Not only by the use of digital means of Teams, but we now book all our transport through one person. So what we try and do is pull it all together so that we try and get it onto a scheduled boat. Even in the winter, one of the boats that are running, you know, more frequently, we try and amalgamate boating. So we try and reduce, and I think we've made some really good savings there this year. We've also started trying to be more proactive with booking of the early years boating as well, trying to combine that with other boating requirements. I think that is beginning to show a little bit of effect. But yes, I think there's work to be done about how we deliver those services. As I said, we're not looking to reduce those at the moment, but it would be good if we could start working to find a more efficient and a better process for that to work. Etc. And some of the things you said are some of the challenges that we do face. You know, how many people who, when difference between a club at 11 o'clock on a Saturday and one at 9 o'clock and things like that, how can we make it all better and more efficient? Can we make clubs that have better timings, match the boating costs, the boating timetable better?
You live on the off island, you have to know that it's not that convenient, and if you want to do these things, you have to be prepared to put up with certain things, I would have said. So, you know, it can't all be your way, I guess is what I'm saying. You know, the boat's 10 o'clock, that's what you've got to catch to do it, rather than saying, oh, well, no, all right, you need one for 9, you need one for 11, you need one for 2. It is a bit, you know, you couldn't do that on the mainland. The bus would be 10 o'clock and you get the bus and you go and wait there for 2 hours.
Yeah. I hear what you say. I mean, that is a challenge that we have, because obviously people on the off islands will have a slightly different view, and we obviously need to come up with a system that everybody is happy with, and that's a challenge.
Sorry, I'm going to bring the elephant into the room. I would like to sort of link into what was just being said is the post-16 issue. And I know everyone's going to lean back in their chairs and try to take a deep breath. But it sort of links in what I was saying about empty housing and everything. It's trying to find this way of making this jigsaw puzzle fit. That if we can find a way of finding the kind of funding that our children need for that security to go away for further education, they then might come back here because there are opportunities to work with housing, accommodation linked to jobs. You're then not maybe struggling so hard to find people that want to work within care or within the waste sites or the management teams. And also it might reduce the fact that we have a lot of people working from home in Wales or Newquay or wherever they're working from home. I just feel that there's been a lot of crisis management on budgets, and you're saying this EFS that you've applied for, what happens if you get it this year but you don't? What happens next year? What happens the year after? We have to find a way of making that jigsaw puzzle work, that we can fund our children safely to be educated on the mainland at 16, which is a legal requirement, we all know that, and feel that there are opportunities in Scilly to come back to apprenticeships through the council or through care, or it's the way of us fighting that corner further for our post-16 funding to build that jigsaw puzzle that we need as a community for perpetuity.
Yeah, I mean, there's several parts to that. The post-16 as a sort of standalone discussion about funding for post-16 as it stands today. We are continually discussing that with DFE officials. We have to say that over the last few months that those conversations have got more difficult rather than easier, unfortunately. But we are still having those discussions, and we will still be putting the cases that, you know, it needs to be reviewed. I think there's always going to be a challenge to see whether the funding gets to the level that people may want it to get to, i.e. funding some of the placements that we know are talked about, but working with DFE to try and improve the offer is what we're doing. And I believe the MP has got a meeting with the Minister shortly as well, so hopefully maybe he can get some leeway on that, or some movement on that. In terms of the other point, it's not lost on us. We have started reviewing our sort of what we call some of our main strategies, and one of those is our economic development strategy. We know that Duchy are doing similar at the moment, looking at what their view of the islands are in the future. We're doing the similar with our economic development plan, but we're doing it together with the Duchy, so we're not doing it remotely. We're joining up with them on it and sharing resources and sharing the thinking, etc. And very much so is that we predominantly have a tourist industry economy. Traditionally, that is relatively low paid, which then has the conflict about what you want as the best outcome for your children on the islands when they finish their education, etc. You know, you end up with very highly qualified people with degrees, etc. And you know, the only job opportunities on the islands are changeover and things like that. So that we do need to try and think how that starts fitting together. I think there's an opportunity from the council's perspective, we are now offering apprenticeships, and we will do more and more of that as and when we can. Obviously, we're in a position with very tight finances at the moment, so we're not exactly out growing the size of the organisation, and we also do work through one of our teams to work with other employers on the island to encourage apprenticeships. But there's also the issue is that what sort of jobs can we get on the islands? And you talked about people doing jobs remotely, and do jobs remotely from here for London boroughs. So can we turn that full circle? And I think we need to think about how we do that, the skills we need, the infrastructure we need for that. I think it's already happened in a couple of places. There's people sat in here I know who work remotely for elsewhere in the country. So that's a model we need to probably think about, because quality of life here, but if they can plug into those higher paid jobs, which gives them a better quality of life and gives them the challenge, then that's what we should be aiming for.
Can I ask if you've put the council house tax up by the full amount? And why have we got empty council houses if we've got such a shortage?
You mean the social council houses? Yeah, today council agreed to put the council house rent up, if that's what you're talking about, the rent. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so the social fund went up by 4.8%, which is the government calculated figure based on 1% over and above the September CPI. General fund housing members decided to put up by the same amount.
Why have we got empty council houses when we're so short?
I can't answer that if we have got empty council houses. We have a list of people. I mean, I'd go away and have that discussion.
I think when we had this before, we asked the same question. You said we don't, but we still do have.
Which ones are you thinking of, Joe?
There's one at least down Enna that I know of.
No.
Enna? No, Sheila. Enna, yeah, at least. I'm sure there's more. I don't know. It's been back 2 years.
I can go away specifically. The only I can't comment on it. I'll make the right, make a guess, but it'd probably be wrong, and then I'd have to backtrack on what I said. I'm sure there are empty properties. Are you talking whether they're on our list of council houses or whether they're duchy houses?
Last one, I won't ask again. You said earlier about how the government are basing whatever figure it was on the fact that we will have 200 more houses by 2028. How do you make them understand that, although it's probably a stupid question, isn't it? But are the MPs, the Cornwall and Isles of Scilly MPs, are they fighting our corner, or is it just in the too hard basket?
I'll come in on that if you like. We're only laughing because of the struggle that we're having with them. No, we had a meeting, Russell and I had a meeting with the senior civil servant who is allocating our settlement. And for a start, he said, "Oh, welcome from the Isle of Scilly." He hasn't even got a clue what the setup is here at all. We explained there were several flaws in it. Russell's touched on some of them, but the remoteness and accessibility, they hadn't even calculated. They hadn't even looked at that. And Cornwall got 57 million, I think, for remoteness and accessibility. And are we more remote than Cornwall? Possibly. Say the council tax figure's wrong, the second home figure is wrong, and there's a raft of other calculations which they have made, assumptions that they have made which are incorrect. I challenged him and said, because he couldn't answer the question, I said, what have you done about, you know, the remoteness and accessibility? What are you going to do about correcting the council tax? He didn't answer any of the questions. And I said to him that we might have to have a look at this legally. And he basically said, don't threaten, because it's not going to do you any good and it's not going to do the government any good. And I said, well, I don't want to threaten. I said, but I want answers. My community want answers as to why you're not giving us the correct settlement. And he still hasn't come back and answered. I wrote to him again following the meeting. He has still not answered the questions. So it's unfortunately, it's a battle, but we're not going to let them. Yes, yes, to be fair, not on those meetings. He hasn't attended any of the meetings, but he was trying to get a meeting with the minister for us. She refused to meet us. This is Alison McGovern. Yeah, we have got a meeting on the 18th. We've managed to get, not the MP hasn't arranged this, but we've managed to get a meeting with Baroness Taylor, who came and visited here with officials in the summer, and Lord Hendy, who is the Lord's Minister for Transport. So we're going to have a further meeting with them. But to be quite honest with you, they just want to kick us into the long grass. You know, it is, I can't tell you the struggle that Russell and some of us have had. It's just, they just don't seem to get it. But what was quite interesting, I hope you stop me if I'm not allowed to say this, but we, as you know, have applied for this exceptional funding. The government are not looking at that themselves. They've got an accountancy firm called Sitfa, who are analysing the bids, the councils that have put in for this exceptional funding. And they spoke to Russell on the phone. This lead man from Sitfa spoke to Russell and basically said to him, I don't know why you're applying for emergency funding, for exceptional funding. And Russell's a bit taken aback, you know. He said, what do you mean? He said, well, he said, if the government funded you properly, you wouldn't need it. You know, he said exactly that. He said, I've analysed all your funding from government and there are serious flaws in it, and they are not funding you as they should be funding you. And as we said to this guy, the senior official, if we take emergency funding, it's only kicking the can down the road. It's not actually fixing what we need to fix with everything. So whether he has had the grit, as a polite way of putting it, to actually say to government, look, you are not, because he's put in his report, whether we're not allowed to know what he's put in his report, but he told Russell we're not funded properly. And whether he's put that in his report to government or whether he's going to be frightened of kickback from the government if he says what he thinks, we don't know yet. But one good thing is that we may be able to employ Sitfa on our behalf if this fails, to actually, because obviously we can't give up this fight. This fight's got to go on until it's resolved. And I don't think it'll cost us very much. But we could use the fact that they've analysed our funding. They are the accountants that the government use. So if we get them to do a report on our behalf, you know, a more detailed report, not just around the emergency funding, then it should carry a lot of weight. So it's a possibility.
Probably worth just mentioning it, but just keeping it at the high level, that we did also have support put in through the duchy to government to try and get a better position, but again, hasn't actually resulted in anything. So we have tried to pull every lever possible at the moment to get the government to listen.
I was just about to say what Alison was about to say. Yeah, why are we not going to the press? And if we've exhausted every other route of lobbying, shouldn't we lobby the press? Could we find some allies in the media who you could use our cause to demonstrate something about the government? I feel that, you know, if we can say that the government isn't properly funding a rural community, I don't want to get too political at all, but it seems to be classic. Government doesn't care about the rural communities, which goes back to a lot of different governments, not just this one. Can we explore that? I mean, that's very much more of a political question for Robert rather than Russell, but it seems like our only option.
Sorry, very good question, Henry. We've tried. You won't believe this, but it's actually, Russell will tell you, Nigel Blackler went to speak to senior officials in the Department for Transport the other week, and he turned round and the officials said to Nigel Blackler, "What the hell's going on the Isles of Scilly?" So Nigel said, "Well, what do you mean?" He said, "Well, there's hell up in Whitehall about it. Everybody is talking about the Isles of Scilly because we've got our teeth into them. And we've written to every minister, we've written, you know, we've just been absolutely going for them because we want this resolved properly." And one, obviously, you know, the press is the next step, if you like. Andrew George did actually make a statement about the fact that they thought he thought the government had cast the Isles of Scilly adrift, which isn't far wrong. But it didn't actually get a lot of traction. I don't know anybody picked it up. Nobody contacted me for a statement or anything. So, but I think what we're trying to do at the moment is, as I say, the Duchy have been very supportive. I know the minister wrote back to Prince William and actually said basically they can't help us, government can't help us, and ended up by saying at the bottom of his letter, "I remain, sir, your obedient servant," or something or other, which is obviously complete rubbish because I don't think the government actually want to support the Duchy either in this, which is a political thing. So therefore, nothing really came back with that. But I think the answer to your question is if we don't get what we want next week, if we don't get this, either the government turning round and saying to us, "We understand from SITFA that you are not funded properly, therefore we're going to sort it out and you're going to get it," or "We'll give you this exceptional funding and then we will look further at your claim for the settlement." If we don't get either of those, then I think we have to go to the press big time. And but you know, that's just where I think we are at the minute.
Just to follow on then, I understand a few years ago there was talk in Scotland, in particular I think it was Shetland, after not being funded properly, they threatened independence or joining Norway. It sounds ridiculous, but it's headline grabbing and it may be an option for us. Have we considered making a case of becoming a dependency, independent or whatever, anything to get people's attention and actually explore alternative governance models? I mean, I mean it semi-seriously, but have we looked at becoming a crown dependency? Could we sustain ourselves economically if all taxation and all our income stayed on Scilly rather than it being siphoned off to central government and then being given back to us? Would we be viable as a community if we were to be financially independent from government? And even still, do you think there's an argument to be made that we should be not necessarily independent as a sovereign nation, but at least a dependency or an autonomous or a more autonomous local government? I'm not sure if that's something we could explore, but
Again, Henry, another very good question, and we've discussed this. And when I was in London recently, trying to deal with this situation, I went to see the City of London, who, as you may know, are sui generis authority like we are. I mean, obviously very different and very wealthy, but they are also extremely helpful. In fact, one of our members sitting in the back of the room is related to the Rembrandts, they call him, who I met with. And they want to try and help us as well around our legal status. And our monitoring officer is in touch with their monitoring officer as we speak, trying to see whether or not there are any beneficial loopholes for us. We looked at things like crown dependency and so on. There may be some possibilities down there, but it needs an awful lot of research and work, and it's not going to solve our problem at the moment. But your other point is that might be useful to use in, to stir up the press or something. So we will further consider it, Henry. Thank you.
I was just going to, with reference to Henry's last point, there's a wonderful Indian comedy called Passport to Pimlico, which is exactly about that. They seeded from the UK and it worked, but I don't think it'll work for us. But what Russell mentioned earlier on deprivation indices, now I just wanted to flesh that out. We've got full employment, we have no homelessness, we haven't got any children in care. Now, all these things in the government boxes, you multiply it together, they're all zero, so we get nothing. So we just don't fit into their patterns at all. We don't need it because we haven't got any problems according to their scoring, because the problems we've got just aren't on their radar. And we've, I've seen lots of letters from the government. Certainly the previous council meeting, we had some feedback really from the DFE about post 16, and it's the same flannel all the time. Oh, it's somebody else's job. They pass it on to another department, and then it goes round in circles because they don't care about us because we don't fit in. And I cannot emphasise the amount of work that Robert and Russell and other officers are put in talking to government, and it's just you just feel like it's complete. Well, frankly, it feels like it's pissing in the wind. They are just terrible. They just don't seem to care about us, and I can't really emphasise how frustrating it is, because it's like with post 16, it seems pretty obvious, but no, and going to the press, that possibly it'll work. But if you think of it just referring to post 16, they've done a very effective campaign. They've been in a number of national newspapers. It's not moved an inch. So I don't know. It's like David and Goliath just seems to be winning all the time at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a budget for public realm? And if so, what's happening? Because as always, our town's just a mess, and the visitor season is starting. And what can we do? Because it's embarrassing, basically.
We did hear that at the public meeting. Initially, we were thinking of putting in some growth into the budget to pay for some additional work on the public realm, but unfortunately, at the moment, the financial position, I've had to remove it because we are unbalanced at the moment going forward. And I've taken out nearly every bid for growth from every service to try and get a balanced position. I'm still a long way away from it, as I said this earlier. So it went in, it was there for a short while. Unfortunately, I've had to remove it due to our funding pressures. Not removing some of the non-statutory and moving it in. I think that's going to be a conversation that all council and elected members may have to have during the next 12 months, because we're going to have to start thinking, are government going to fund us? If not, how are we going to help ourselves? How are we going to do things differently? Work with partners, work with the community. I've seen some quite positive ideas from people recently, from people I've spoken to, about how you can engage more, particularly towards the off islands, and get more community engagement into stuff which at the moment we're funding. So we need to look at the whole and whether that can free up funding that can be then invested elsewhere. I mean, that's an elected member decision, but it will be one of the options we have as we go through the year. But it's not going to be done. It's not going to be done for this year. I was rather hoping that we would, but I have already asked, particularly the team, to start looking at a couple of the issues that were raised as we move into March. I've already asked to have a look. We won't have the money to do what we were hoping for, but I have said that any day now activity will start on preparations for the season, and we need to address some of the issues that were raised at the meeting and make sure that at least we're doing the best we can with the existing resources.
Can I just come in on that? The microphone at the optimum place. I'm really keen to see how the community can help themselves on some of these issues. I'm well aware that Penzance have a group of volunteer gardeners who sort of go around some of the public spaces around the railway station, around the tourist information centre, around the harbour area, and work in partnership with the local authority to try and somewhat solve some of the solutions themselves. I think I see probably more of that model working on the off islands too. When we went to our public meeting on St Martin's back in October, November time, 10 minutes before the meeting started, there were a group there doing some tidying up. So I think in other areas, they were making some of the budget, having some of the budget conversations we're having now 5, 10, 15 years ago, and we're finding alternative ways to sort of be creative with their solutions. And I wonder whether we as a community have to sort of think a little bit more laterally to try and find some of those solutions ourselves. I don't know what they are, and I don't exactly know what the solution would look like, but I think we should be open-minded to the idea that the council isn't and probably can't be the solution to all our challenges. It can't be doing everything it was doing 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago, even if it was doing it. But how do we move some of those matters forward? I'm thinking about the park. I'm thinking about those sad little planters outside the town hall. They don't look like they've had much TLC, but they were set up by the U3A. I think we just need to try and think and re-energise some of those things, that little things can make a little bit of a difference.
I think the U3A still do tend them in the middle of the season. They're always out there watering them and stuff like that. I think at some point to try and sort out, because Robert, when you first started, the public realm was your thing. And I think at some point the council and the police have to sort out that parking so that if somebody actually gets out in the sweeper lorry, they can actually sweep. But the other one is Lloyds Bank, which is slowly crumbling. And I think at the last meeting, you were going to find out who owned that. And you did say shame them into redecorating. But I talked to one of my guests who was an ex-inspector of something. And he said there is actually, for a grade 2 listed building, they have to repair and maintain it. And when I Googled that, there is a clause there. So they shouldn't have a choice. And bearing in mind, it's right in our main street. And one of the first things that's seen when you get off the boat, I think it's, I agree with Joel, to me, the off islands always look great. They're always neat and tidy. It's only us that isn't. And even if we could only just get the main street done, bearing in mind, this is our economy, even if we just get the main street done, get Lloyds Bank tidied up, all that kind of stuff, then it's something.
Yeah, I'll come in there because we have actually done something about that now, believe it or not. And Russell, only in my meeting with Russell yesterday, he mentioned that our director, Nicola Stinson, was dealing with Lloyds Bank over that, and we're hopeful of a result. And also the pigeon mess outside the post office. We've tried the gently, and now Russell has instructed that we get, hard on this. So I think you'll find something will happen on Lloyds Bank very shortly, and on the pigeon mess for a start. Also, I've had feedback from the police who, I don't know whether you're aware, we had a team over from the police who, I can't remember the department that they're called now, but the Police and Crime Commissioner set it up, and they tried to help us with our parking and stuff, and with a bottom-up approach, because the trouble with all that is we've actually all of us have to deal with this. Again, the council can't do it. We haven't got the powers to do it. We've all got to want to get rid of the cars off Hugh Street,
Every work.
Yeah, no, well, that's an added.
And they all
complication.
park in Hugh
No,
Town,
absolutely. No, absolutely, but
bylaws or something.
but we have, as I say, we've had an initial report that I understand is now completed, but we haven't got it yet. But literally any day with their suggestions. So I'm not saying they're going to have the solution, but they're certainly going. They've done a report, and we should have that any day now. So we are trying to deal with that as well. Also, Russell is pushing about the fact that we're not a transport authority, and we're trying to get some traction on that, which is why I mentioned earlier we've got a useful meeting with Lord Hendy on, I think, the 18th of this month, where that is going to be centre of the agenda. So that might give us the powers that we need to deal with that as well. Okay.
Just covering that, both those comments that Robert made, we are looking at the statutory. We are going down the line of statutory notices at the moment. They're a bit more difficult than we first thought, but both bank and other stuff. The shaming doesn't seem to have worked, so statutory is the way that we're looking at. I can't remember the exact legislation we're looking at, but we're looking at it and to see how we serve it.
Okay, I'm mindful that we've got a number of people on the call online who haven't had a chance to speak. Is there anyone who'd like to ask any questions? Okay, taking that silence as no. Councillor Williams has got a statement he'd like to read.
Yeah, I think so it's related to childcare. I went to bed last night and my email inbox was empty, and when I woke up and opened it up, there was 15, 20 emails related to childcare. So I'm picking up on that point now. I was sent a statement. I've also been sent various emails that people wanted me to read out. So I'm sure you don't want me to read out 7 emails broadly saying the same thing. So I'll just try and sort of capture the gist of it. So childcare providers are independent of the council, but they claim they get 90% of their income from the council via the DFE for the work they do, looking after 1, 2, 3 and 4-year-olds, preschool children generally. There was some communication yesterday from the council which was interpreted as that we were giving them no increase in funding for next financial year. So question 1 to Russell in a minute will be just to clarify that position. They're also claiming that local authorities can sort of set the rate that they pay their childcare providers, and they're claiming that they're about 8% below the national average, and would obviously like to close that gap. So that's another question. And the sort of suggestion in lots of emails has been that as a council we don't value childcare providers. So I just wanted to clarify that we certainly do. I think we discussed it this morning in full council, and we had a budget meeting after that, that in my opinion, the economy of the islands is sort of built around good, accessible, affordable childcare, school readiness and all those sorts of opportunities that allow children to go into their schooling is based on good quality childcare. So I think we all take our hats off to childcare providers, and as an authority want to do all we can to make them viable and sustainable. We certainly don't need less. I think we need more, and we're trying to do some more work around the holiday childcare. So I think the questions that seem to be coming out from the emails were, is there going to be any increase whatsoever? And can we, over the course of the next financial year in the budget, which we're consulting on today, try and do all we can to try and close the financial gap that childcare providers perceive with their mainland counterparts?
I can respond to those questions. The first one, will there be any changes in the what we spend on with nursery care, etc.? The budget is based on a 3% uplift for inflation against all budgets to ensure that they are maintained at the same value in real terms. So they will go up by at least 3% in terms of that. That's the inflationary uplift. In terms of a growth bid over and above that to start closing the gap. There is nothing built into the budget. As I said earlier, there was that was never being one in the budget, but most growth items we're not able to fund anyway at the moment due to our financial position. So inflation, yes, but anything above inflation, no, at the moment. Again, that could be something that we discuss as we go through the year and finding, those difficult decisions, because we're in that position where if we start the year with this exceptional funding, which by the way is temporary borrowing, so we have to pay for that as well. It's not a grant or anything. But if we do end up being able to deliver a balanced position, every time we want to spend a bit more money here, we're going to have to find it somewhere else. So those decisions will have to, and that isn't my decision, that's the decisions of the elected members. So we can do the work for them, we can put the proposals in front, but if we want to close that gap, we'll have to find the resources from somewhere else.
Thank you. Can I ask, are there any more questions from within the room? Okay, in that case, I'd like to thank you all for your time and for getting involved with this public consultation. As stated at the beginning of the meeting, we will use this information that you provided to inform the Council of the Isles of Scilly's budget for 2026-27 and a medium-term financial plan 2026 to 2029. Thank you.
Thank you.